When I first talked to my friends about psychological hygiene, one of them asked, "Is it about thinking clean, pure thoughts?" It's kind of funny she asked that because I don't think she does that quite a lot. The short answer is no. Psychological hygiene doesn't magically prevent your mind from trespassing dark, twisted nonsense. It is about the daily steps that we can take to ensure good mental health. Before we delve into this topic, I want to highlight a phenomenon that I often see in the real world: the tendency to perceive psychological ailments as secondary to physical illnesses. Human cognition is such a major part of our everyday life, yet it is one of the most unexplored areas of our pale blue dot. Fortunately, and perhaps unfortunately, the biological makeup of the human brain gave us this tendency. Intuitively, we react much faster to things that require very little mental processing. In most cases, physical illnesses and injuries can be directly observed by the naked eye. According to an article on the Discover magazine by Dennis Grady, around 30% of our brain is devoted to vision. This is why humans can process visual information with ease and respond rapidly to visual stimulus. However, comprehending emotional burden in others often requires abstract thinking. This is why we sometimes have a hard time empathizing with others' emotional pain. This tendency of perceiving psychological illnesses as less urgent is not only apparent in people's perception of others, but also people's perception of themselves. Now, this is not meant to offend anyone, but how many of you regularly perform personal hygiene? Raise your hand, please, if you do. Don't be afraid. Good. I see most, if not all of you, are quite well versed in the importance of self-care. Another question: how many of you regularly perform psychological hygiene? Or how many of you even know what psychological hygiene is? While most 6-year-olds know to brush your teeth twice a day, wash your hands before meals, and cry horrendously when Iron Man wasn't wearing his costume, most people know nothing about regulating emotional wellness. As depicted here, this child has obviously encountered an emotionally upsetting event, and he knows to respond to it. However, the ways of mending this emotional upheaval is never formally explained to us. So you might be wondering, what is exactly a psychological or emotional wound? Contrary to common beliefs, it is not simply a thing that happened to us, but rather a self-disempowering belief which stems from a single or a series of traumatic incidents. Some have a difficult time addressing their emotional wounds because they equate forgetting the experience as healing the wound. Additionally, some perceive these beliefs as preventative measures from getting hurt again. An example could be believing you're unfit for positions simply because you're rejected once or twice. Instead of licking your wounds and starting fresh, you become most self-critical when your self-esteem is already scraping rock bottom. The belief seems to protect you from experiencing another rejection. However, the only thing it manages to do is to make you more capable of mental self-destruction. The correct way to deal with this, firstly and most importantly, is to accept that you're wounded. Take responsibility for your wounds instead of blaming external factors. I mean, if you got a leg injury on the soccer field, you will probably say something along the lines of, "I fell down on the field," instead of, "The field was evil enough to levitate and slam into my leg." If we can take responsibility for our physical wounds, why can't we do the same for our emotional wounds? It has been often shown that feeling left out in group situations will light up part of our brain's pathway called the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, a region which I have difficulty pronouncing. Anyways, it is, according to a joint study called Windows to the Brain, it is the pathway which regulates physical pain, stress, and grievance as equivalents of physical pain. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't be the only person who is guilty of confessional rants. In fact, complaining is one of the few things that every single human is good at. I occasionally complain to my mom, whom I never consider a sympathetic listener. Whenever I unleash any kind of dissatisfaction about my life, such as my odd fear of sprinklers or shooting waters in general, she always manages to turn it around and dump it all back at me with this iconic phrase: "I don't think you want a solution. You just want me to listen and pretend to sympathize." Of course, I'm flabbergasted at the fact that my own mom will refuse to take my stance. However, she is partially right. Simply repeating a sorrowful story is futile. This is the first and really hopefully the last time I'll probably admit my mom is right in public. I can guarantee you that she is savoring this moment right now as a proud monument of her excellent parenting. And that's my mom if you want to find her in the crowd. For the most part of my life, it has been a smooth flight with occasional emotional turbulence sprinkled here and there. However, the confusion about how to deal with emotional injuries and the lack of information about them is one of the reasons why I developed a keen interest in psychology. One incident which I will talk about here was when someone I cared about a lot said the following sentence: "Your Mandarin speaking is ridiculously basic. It is no surprise that people laugh behind your back during the heat of an argument." For a very long time, I chose to marginalize myself from the Chinese community and avoided situations which require Mandarin speaking at all costs. And if they can't be avoided, I contemplated my words obsessively. I couldn't stop thinking about what this person said until it has taken on a whole new meaning, until I can no longer hear the voice which orated this phrase, until I can only hear my own voice, loud and clear, chanting and echoing, "People laugh behind your back." The correct way to deal with this is to change the ending of the story, which is something I've completely failed to do. I allowed the story to change and alter my actions instead of me letting myself empower upon this experience. Instead of repeating the pain and despair, end the story by focusing on what you gain from this experience. Our human inclination to negativity will make this change difficult. However, it ultimately forces you to take control of your experience and shape it into a tale of empowerment. Your stories are not trivial accounts of self-loathing and self-pity. They are epic tales that end with wisdom and self-growth. Now, let's look at one of the most commonly overlooked causes of emotional injury: loneliness. According to Reframing, loneliness is not defined by the physical state of being alone, but rather the want of intimacy. Although loneliness does not arise with one or two traumatic incidents, it is a form of desire which can manifest itself into many self-abasing beliefs. Additionally, surrounding yourself with friends also does not guarantee protection from loneliness. A friend of mine, let's just call her Emery, because she was one of the first unusual babies named on momandbabies.com. Anyways, Emery went to her first party and did a fantastic job multitasking. She didn't have fun and didn't manage to fit in. In her emotionally hungover text to me, she repeated the following words and phrases: lonely, left out, and I don't belong here. As demonstrated, loneliness is the driving force behind so many self-defeating beliefs. It has been shown that loneliness is also responsible for many of our physical illnesses. Psychobiologists have shown that loneliness is due to stress sends misleading hormonal signals to molecules on genes which govern human behavior. Loneliness is just as high of a health risk factor as chain smoking. Cigarettes have a warning label, but loneliness doesn't. Additionally, individuals who feel rejected or left out in group situations often develop a habit of being on guard. When they're consciously alert, their body will transition into a physical state of inflamed strain. Being in this constant state can result in poor performance of the immune systems. A long-term study done by Cole from UCLA in the late 80s demonstrate a strong correlation between social wellness and susceptibility to diseases such as sexually transmitted diseases. At the time of the study, it was widely believed that gay men were responsible for the AIDS epidemic in the US, and there was a major push to quarantine them. As a result, closeted homosexual men who are constantly under the stress and fear of being exposed or blackmailed are 25% more likely to develop STDs and die prematurely from them. This is 5 times the mortality rate of severe air pollution. Briefly put, feelings of unbelonging can have serious consequences to our physical health. Another study which demonstrates the effect of loneliness is the rat park study. This study has shown that rats who are caged alone are 19 times more likely to indulge in addictive substances such as meth compared to rats who are caged in groups. This was groundbreaking as the level of addiction is not rooted in the potency of the drug, but rather the environmental stressors that are in place. All in all, the consequences of loneliness cannot be taken lightly, yet we often choose to overlook the seemingly minor but significant cause for emotional injuries. Consulting a professional is often necessary to heal emotional wounds. Some people may think that therapy, counseling, or mental health is just some senseless hoo-ha that doesn't actually exist. However, if we all agree that physical illnesses are real and that seeking happiness is an inherent human right, why are we choosing to overlook the factors which prevent our physical systems from performing best and choosing to neglect emotional wounds? Acknowledging your emotional wound does not make you in any way, shape, or form weak, diseased, or abnormally peculiar. Addressing your wound is a courageous act of self-empowerment. Neglecting these wounds and letting them deepen is nothing short of prolonged self-harm. Performing psychological hygiene is just as, if not more important than our personal hygiene. I mean, would you rather lose your tooth or lose your mind? Thank you.